The following images and information are for educational purposes only. Imagine growing up in a very poor family where there is hardly enough food to go around. Barely surviving, your parents decide that money is more important than you, so they sell you into one of the most widespread industries across the world, sex trafficking. One day you're a child playing outside, and the next day you become a slave to adult men of all ages, of all races, with all the same intention, to have you perform sexual favors for them. For the next 10 or 20 years of your life, if you stay alive that long, you are a slave in the human trafficking cycle. You are someone's property, and you live a life of abuse. This horror story is not made up. This is the real lifestyle of so many women and children from Cambodia, Thailand, Moldova and Ukraine, Mombasa and Kenya, just to name a few. Innocent people forced into a cycle our world feeds. To be clear, the definition of human trafficking is the transport of people under false pretenses from one nation to another for forced labor or prostitution. These victims might be told that there is a nanny job or a waitress job opening in some location, only to find once venturing there that the real job is that of forced prostitution. Shelter is in the form of a brothel or a locked apartment, and painful beatings are a daily occurrence. All of their forms of identity are taken away. They're in a foreign place and are left with no communication with any family or friends. This is a gruesome supply and demand business, with the UN citing 127 countries supplying the trafficked humans, and 137 countries creating the demand. The US is one of the top receivers. While some traffickers deceive young women and children and lure them in with false promises, others resort to kidnapping. Sex traffickers torture, starve, beat, and rape and drug their victims. A woman's body or a young child's body becomes a product to be sold to those willing to pay. And yes, our ugly world has many people willing to pay. The CIA estimates that roughly 800,000 people across the globe are enslaved each year. Too often, our leaders get consumed with other atrocities taking place in our world that they neglect to address human sex trafficking. But there are a few who have illuminated the situation. Senator McCain once said, "We must view this evil form of 21st century slavery every bit as important as drug trafficking." Colin Powell once said, "Can you imagine young children learning their ABCs being used as sex slaves for predators? It is a sin against humanity, and it is a horrendous crime." 200,000 children are traded in Central and West Africa. Orphanages, especially in Eastern Europe, because many of them are over capacity, are key targets for traffickers to find their next victims. What many don't realize is the fact that so many of these sex slaves face dying from AIDS before they're 30 years old, let alone the thousands of victims who are given a sexually transmitted disease and are forced to continue passing it on to others. In addition, any woman who becomes pregnant is forced to have an abortion and oftentimes suffers from incomplete abortions, sepsis, hemorrhaging, internal bleeding, or death. Beyond the physical harm, sex slaves face social consequences as well. Once they return home, if they do at all, they deal with rejection from their families and communities, who see them as a dishonor or tainted. So even if they do make it out alive, out of this horrible industry, most do not have a normal life to go back to seek comfort in. I am a female 21-year-old living in the US, and it's time my generation opens its eyes and mouths. No longer can we act ignorant. No longer can we be oblivious. US citizens especially have the power to speak, and we are fortunate enough to have been born in a country where we can say what's on our minds, say what we disapprove of. So many countries look to the US for aid and support. This issue of human trafficking is worthy of our help. We need to stop this cycle of abuse and cycle of silence. The fact that the US is one of the top countries receiving the services of this industry should startle us. We must speak to our local government officials and representatives. We must find out what's being done, writing a letter each week if necessary. Raising awareness will not occur through silence, and it can begin with you. At the very least, we must inform others. Write an article about sex trafficking for your city's newspaper, for a local school's paper, for a class. Make combating human trafficking a priority. Make these young girls' lives and future a priority.